You want to start sewing but you don't know where to start? In this video I'm going to show you my essential sewing tools you need to get started. On my channel I'm doing lots of different sewing projects, from more beginner-friendly ones to more fancy dress recreations. I just do everything that comes to my mind. The first tool I want to talk about is a good pair of fabric scissors, and it's just very important to have fabric scissors because if you ever tried to cut fabric with paper scissors, you might have noticed that it doesn't work very well, and if you're trying to do that you just waste lots of time, so it's very nice to have fabric scissors. The second tool you need are just some pins or clips or both, whatever you prefer, because with these you can just pin or clip the fabric together before you sew it, and that way you can ensure that you put it together the correct way and that the fabric doesn't shift around, and it just makes sewing it together a lot easier. Tool number 3 is a tape measure, and tape measures are just very nice if you want to measure something out on your body, because you can't really use a ruler to do that, because usually if you're measuring out your body you just have to bend it and you can't do that with a ruler, so it's just nice to have a tape measure. And I'm using this one you can pull out of this little box, and when you press this button it just goes back in there. And I just really like to use a tape measure of this type because my sewing table tends to be a bit messy, and then I'm just glad that the tape measure isn't a tangled mess. Tool number 4 is a seam ripper, and we all try to avoid it, but sometimes you just sew something together that you were not supposed to sew together, and then you have to undo the seam, and trying to do it with a pair of scissors or something like that is just super annoying, so your seam ripper is your best friend in this situation. And also if you're doing a lot of upcycling, it's just nice to have a seam ripper to be able to take the original garments apart. The next tool, which I'm actually trying to avoid to use, but I still have to use it every once in a while, is a hand sewing needle. And I recommend to get a few of these because at least I tend to lose them. But if you just have to sew something together that you can't sew on the sewing machine, it's just necessary to have a hand sewing needle. Tool number 6 is an iron, and there's some reasons why it's useful to have an iron, and the first is that it actually makes your seams stronger. The second is that it also makes your seams look a lot more professional, and the third is that it just makes sewing easier in a way that, for example, when you press a hem before you sew it, it just lays a lot more flat and you don't have to struggle so much with making it lay down flat right before you sew it together. The next tool on my list is a pencil or a dressmaking pen or just some chalk, and it's just very nice to have something to mark your fabric with, because very often you have to mark where your pieces have to line up or where you have to cut, and it's just nice to have something on hand you can use to draw on fabric. Tool number 8 is a ruler, and I recommend to use a big ruler because the lines you have to draw on the fabric are usually rather long, and also if you're making your patterns by yourself, it's just very nice to have a long ruler. The last tool, and also the most obvious one, is a sewing machine, and of course you can hand sew, but it just takes forever, and I personally just wouldn't waste the time doing it. And on the sewing machine the result also looks a lot better, at least if I am the one hand sewing. And I would also recommend to get a good sewing machine, because nothing is worse than trying to sew something together and your thread just keeps snapping and your sewing machine is skipping stitches. But that doesn't mean that you have to spend a lot of money on a sewing machine, because you can also just buy it secondhand, or just ask your friends or family if someone has a sewing machine standing around which they don't need. So these were my 9 essential sewing tools which I really couldn't live without, and I just hope it was helpful for you and you start sewing today. If you just started sewing and you're a total beginner, you can check out this video where I show very detailed how to sew a wallet.